The evening air in New York City carried that special kind of energy that only comes with autumn. Inside the grand concert hall, hundreds of people were filing through the ornate doors, their shoes clicking against the marble floors. Tonight was supposed to be special. One of the world's most celebrated pianists was hosting a masterclass, and musicians from all over the country had traveled here just for a chance to watch him work. Vincent Ashford was the kind of pianist people wrote articles about. At 38 years old, he had already performed in every major concert hall you could think of. His albums sold millions of copies. Music critics called him a genius. But success has a strange way of changing people, and Vincent wasn't the humble young musician he used to be. Years of praise and applause had built walls around his heart, making him forget what it felt like to struggle or doubt. Among the crowd entering the hall that evening was a teenage girl named Maya Chen. She moved carefully through the lobby, one hand gripping a white cane that swept gently back and forth across the floor. Her other hand held the arm of her music teacher, a kind woman in her 50s named Mrs. Patterson, who had been teaching Maya piano for nearly 10 years. Maya was 17. With long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore a navy blue dress that her mother had helped her pick out that morning. Maya had been blind since the day she was born. She had never seen a sunset, never watched leaves change color and fall, never looked at her own reflection in a mirror. But what Maya couldn't see with her eyes, she experienced through sound in ways most people could never imagine. To Maya, music wasn't just notes on a page or sounds from an instrument. Music was how she understood the world. A minor chord felt like the color blue in her mind. Quick staccato notes were like raindrops on a window, and when she played piano, she could express feelings that words could never capture. The piano was her voice, her eyes, her way of touching a world that often felt just beyond her reach. "There are 7 steps ahead," Mrs. Patterson whispered softly as they approached the entrance to the seating area. "Then we'll turn left and walk about 20 feet to row 3. Maya nodded, counting each step carefully. She had learned to navigate the world through a combination of touch, sound, and the descriptions of trusted people around her. Every new place was like solving a puzzle, mapping it out in her mind so she could move through it safely. As they made their way down the aisle, Maya could feel eyes on her. She had developed a sixth sense about it over the years: the weight of stairs, the sudden hush in nearby conversations, the awkward silence that sometimes followed her presence. Some people didn't know how to react to someone with a disability, others felt pity, and a few, thankfully just a few, felt uncomfortable or even annoyed. The concert hall was filling up quickly. Musicians of all ages chatted excitedly about the evening ahead. Some clutched notebooks ready to take notes on technique. Others recorded voice memos on their phones, preparing to capture any wisdom Vincent might share. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation and nervous energy. Up on the stage, a magnificent grand piano sat under bright lights, its black surface gleaming like a mirror. Vincent was already there, testing the sound with a few scales and arpeggios. He wore an expensive dark suit, his salt and pepper hair styled perfectly. Even his casual warm-up playing was flawless, each note crisp and precise. Maya and Mrs. Patterson settled into their seats in the 3rd row, right in the center. Maya ran her fingers along the armrests, memorizing the texture of the fabric, the distance between seats. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the acoustics of the room. The high ceiling created a beautiful resonance. She could hear someone coughing near the back, the rustle of programs being opened, the low hum of the air conditioning system. "He's on stage now," Mrs. Patterson murmured, tall, very confident looking. "The piano is a Steinway, looks like a Model D concert grand." Maya smiled slightly. She knew that model well. She had played one once at a regional competition 2 years ago. The keys had been perfectly weighted, the tone rich and full. Just thinking about it made her fingers itch to play. Then, cutting through the ambient noise of the crowd, Vincent's voice came through the sound system. He had leaned toward the microphone on the piano, that slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good evening, everyone," he said smoothly. "I'm delighted to see such a passionate group of musicians here tonight." The audience applauded politely. Vincent acknowledged it with a small nod, his eyes scanning the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had performed for audiences his entire adult life. And then his gaze landed on Maya. Maybe it was the white cane propped against her seat. Maybe it was the way she sat, Her head tilted in that particular way blind people often do when listening intently. Whatever caught his attention, Vincent paused, and something shifted in his expression. "I see we have quite the diverse audience today," he said, his voice carrying that edge of amusement that people sometimes use when they're about to say something they think is clever. "Though I must admit, I'm curious what brings someone to a piano masterclass when they can't even see the keys they'd be learning about." The words hung in the air like a chord that had been struck wrong, dissonant and jarring. Maya felt her chest tighten. She had heard variations of this her whole life. The assumptions, the dismissals, the idea that because she couldn't see, she couldn't truly understand or appreciate or create. But hearing it here in front of hundreds of people, from someone who was supposed to represent the best of what music could be, it stung in a way she hadn't expected. Mrs. Patterson's hand found Maya's arm, squeezing gently. Maya could feel her teacher's anger radiating like heat, could hear the sharp intake of breath from people sitting nearby. The comfortable buzz of conversation had died completely. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Maya's fingers tightened around her cane. Her face remained calm, composed, even though inside she felt like she'd been slapped. She had learned not to show hurt, not to give people the satisfaction of seeing they'd wounded her. But this moment felt different. This wasn't just another thoughtless comment from a stranger. This was a test, whether Vincent Ashford realized it or not. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and embarrassment, Maya felt something else beginning to stir. Not anger exactly, but determination. A quiet voice that whispered, "Show them, show him, show everyone what music really means." The silence in the concert hall was thick and uncomfortable, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every small sound. Someone shifted in their seat. A program rustled, and then Mrs. Patterson stood up. She wasn't a tall woman, but in that moment she seemed to tower over everyone around her. Her voice came out steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Mr. Ashford," she said, and there was steel beneath the politeness. "My student has more musical understanding in her little finger than most pianists will ever achieve in their entire lives." A few people in the audience murmured in agreement. Others looked down at their laps, uncomfortable with the confrontation but not brave enough to speak up. Maya remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, her face still composed. But inside, her heart was racing. Vincent stood at the piano, clearly not expecting this response. He was used to admiration, to people hanging on his every word. Criticism was something that happened in private, in reviews he could ignore, not in front of a packed concert hall. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Was it embarrassment, regret? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that practiced smile he'd perfected over years of public performances. "I apologize if I've caused offense," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't quite understand what the fuss was about. "I simply meant that a masterclass focuses heavily on visual technique. Hand position, posture, the physical relationship between the performer and the instrument." He paused, and then added what he clearly thought was a generous olive branch. "But perhaps your student would like to demonstrate her abilities? We have this beautiful Steinway here, and I'm always interested in hearing different perspectives on music." The way he said it made it clear he thought he was being kind. Gracious even. Giving this blind girl a chance to play, probably expecting something simple and sweet that he could praise patronizingly before moving on with his actual masterclass. The audience reacted immediately. Some gasped, shocked that he would put Maya on the spot like this. Others leaned forward in their seats, curious despite themselves. A few exchanged glances that clearly said, "This is going to be awkward." Mrs. Patterson looked down at Maya, her expression asking a silent question. Maya could feel her teacher's gaze even without seeing it. This was her choice. She could decline politely, take the high road, and let the evening continue without further incident. No one would blame her, but Maya had spent 17 years taking the safe road. 17 years of people underestimating her, of being told what she couldn't do, of having doors closed before she even had a chance to knock. Music was the one place where she knew she belonged, where her blindness didn't matter or maybe even helped her hear things others missed. "What's the stage like?" Maya whispered to Mrs. Patterson. Her teacher understood immediately. She leaned close, her voice low and descriptive. 5 steps up, center stage. They're wide steps about 8 feet across. There's a handrail on the right side. Once you're on stage, the piano is about 12 feet ahead, facing the audience. The bench is positioned normally, nothing unusual about the setup. Maya nodded slowly. She could picture it in her mind, mapping out the space the way she always did. 12 feet meant about 16 or 17 steps depending on her stride. The bench would be centered. She'd need to approach from the side to avoid bumping into the piano itself. "I'll play," Maya said quietly. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. "You don't have to." "I know," Maya replied. "But I want to." She stood up and the audience fell silent again. This was a different kind of silence, though. Not uncomfortable anymore, but anticipatory. Maya reached for her cane and began making her way toward the aisle. Mrs. Patterson walked beside her, ready to help, but knowing Maya needed to do this herself. Each tap of the cane against the floor seemed amplified in the quiet hall. Maya counted her steps, measured her pace. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could sense the mixture of pity, curiosity, and skepticism radiating from the crowd. Let them watch, she thought. Let them doubt. When they reached the stage stairs, Mrs. Patterson described them once more. 5 steps, each one about 7 inches high. Handrail on your right. Maya folded her cane and tucked it under her arm. She found the handrail with her right hand and began to climb. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Her left hand reached out, searching for the top. 4 steps, 5, and then she was on the stage. Standing under those bright lights she couldn't see but could feel warming her skin. The wooden stage floor felt different under her feet, more solid somehow. The space around her felt vast and open. She could hear the breathing of the audience, the subtle creaks of seats, the distant hum of electronics. But more than anything, she could sense the piano ahead of her like it was calling to her. She took a breath and started walking. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted each step, her hand outstretched now searching. At step 14, her fingertips brushed against the smooth, cool surface of the piano. She let her hand trail along its curve, finding her way around to the keyboard side. Vincent had stepped back, standing off to the side of the stage. His arms were crossed, and though Maya couldn't see his expression, she could feel his skepticism. It rolled off him in waves. The piano bench was exactly where it should be. Maya sat down, adjusting her position slightly. She ran her fingers lightly across the fallboard, that protective cover over the keys finding its edge. Then she lifted it carefully and set it back in its resting position. The keys were exposed now, ivory smooth under the stage lights. Maya placed her hands gently on the keys without pressing down. This was her ritual, something she did before every performance. She needed to feel the instrument to understand its personality. Every piano was different. Some had keys that were slightly sticky, others had a bright, sharp tone. This Steinway, she could already tell, was well maintained. The keys had that perfect resistance, not too stiff, not too loose. She closed her eyes, though it made no practical difference. It was more for herself, a way to center her thoughts and push away the nervousness that threatened to overwhelm her. Her hands were trembling slightly. She took another deep breath, willing them to steady. In the audience, a man coughed. Someone whispered something to their neighbor. Maya could feel the weight of their expectations, their doubts. Vincent Ashford probably expected her to play something simple and safe. Maybe a basic Mozart piece or a children's song, something that would prove she could find the keys but wouldn't challenge anyone's assumptions. Maya smiled slightly, a small, private smile that no one in the audience could interpret. She had no intention of playing it safe. Her fingers found their starting position, poised above the keys like birds ready to take flight. The entire concert hall seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a confidence that came from years of practice and a deep, unshakable love for music, Maya began to play. The first notes floated into the air like whispers, soft and delicate. Maya had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that was both familiar and deeply personal to her. She had first heard it when she was 7 years old, played by her grandmother on an old upright piano in their living room. Even then, before she had formal training, something about that melody had reached inside her chest and squeezed her heart. But Maya wasn't just playing the notes that Chopin had written down over 150 years ago. She was telling a story with them, pouring her own life into every phrase. Her left hand created a gentle, rolling foundation, like waves lapping against a shore. The rhythm was steady but not mechanical, breathing with its own natural pulse. And then her right hand entered, singing the melody with a tenderness that made it feel brand new, like no one had ever played these notes before. In the audience, people who had been fidgeting in their seats went still, The woman in row 7 who had been checking her phone slipped it back into her purse. The man near the back who had been mentally going over his grocery list found himself completely present in the moment. Even the ushers standing by the door stopped their quiet conversations and turned to listen. Maya swayed gently as she played, her whole body moving with the music. Her face, which had been so carefully composed during Vincent's comments, now showed everything she was feeling. When the melody climbed higher, reaching for something beautiful and just out of reach, her eyebrows lifted and her lips parted slightly. When it descended back down, there was a hint of melancholy in her expression, like remembering something precious that had been lost. She didn't play perfectly, at least not by the strict technical standards that someone like Vincent would judge by. There was a moment where her fingers slipped slightly on a fast passage. In another section, her tempo pushed forward a bit more than traditional interpretation would suggest. But these tiny imperfections didn't diminish the performance. If anything, they made it more real, more human. In the 5th row, a middle-aged woman named Patricia felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had lost her mother 3 years ago, and her mother had played this exact piece every Sunday morning while Patricia was growing up. She hadn't thought about those mornings in years, but suddenly she could smell her mother's coffee, could feel the warmth of sunlight through the kitchen window, could hear her mother humming along with the melody. The grief that she'd been pushing down for so long rose up in her throat, but it didn't hurt the way she'd feared it would. It felt like a release, like finally being able to say goodbye properly. A few seats away, a young man named David was thinking about the girl he'd loved in college, the one who had moved across the country for a job opportunity. He had let her go without telling her how he really felt, and he'd spent the last 2 years wondering if he'd made the right choice. The longing in Maya's playing seemed to echo his own regret, but there was also something else in it. Hope, maybe, or acceptance. The idea that beautiful things could exist even when they hurt. Vincent stood in the wings of the stage, arms still crossed, but his expression had changed. The smug confidence from earlier had faded. His jaw was tight, and he was watching Maya's hands with an intensity that bordered on disbelief. He had heard this nocturne performed hundreds of times. He had played it himself at countless recitals. He knew every note, every proper dynamic marking, every technique that the masters recommended. But what Maya was doing was different. She wasn't trying to prove her technical skill or impress anyone with her knowledge of proper classical interpretation. She was simply being honest. Every note came from somewhere real inside her, some place that Vincent had forgotten existed or maybe had locked away years ago when success started meaning more than the music itself. His fingers, hanging at his sides, twitched slightly. Once upon a time, he had played like this. Before the competitions and the recording contracts, before the reviews and the pressure to maintain his reputation, back when he was just a kid who loved the way piano keys felt under his hands and didn't care about anything except making beautiful sounds. When had that changed? When had music become about perfection instead of connection? Maya moved into the middle section of the piece where the melody becomes more complex, more emotionally intense. Her right hand wove intricate patterns while her left provided a rich, full harmony. This was the part where many pianists tried to show off, playing it faster or louder to demonstrate their technical ability. But Maya did the opposite. She pulled back, playing it almost conversationally, like she was sharing a secret with each person in the audience. There was a moment, just a single measure, where she played a note that wasn't quite in the original score. It was subtle, easy to miss if you didn't know the piece well, but it fit perfectly, adding a layer of unexpected beauty that made the familiar melody feel fresh and surprising. Vincent caught it immediately. It was the kind of artistic choice that only someone with deep musical intuition would make, the kind of thing that can't be taught in master classes or written in textbooks. The piece continued to unfold, and Maya seemed to lose herself completely in the music. Her earlier nervousness had vanished. The audience, the famous pianist watching her, the pressure of the moment, all of it fell away. There was only the piano and the story she was telling through it. She played through sections that spoke of joy, light, and dancing. Her fingers moved quickly but never carelessly, each note clear and purposeful. Then the music shifted again, becoming more introspective. This was the part that always reminded Maya of late nights, of sitting alone in the practice room at school after everyone else had gone home. Those were the times when she felt most herself, when the world made the most sense. As the piece built toward its emotional peak, Maya's whole body leaned into the piano. The volume increased, not in a harsh way, but like a flower opening to the sun. The melody soared above the accompaniment, singing with a kind of desperate beauty. Several people in the audience were crying now, though they couldn't have explained exactly why. It was just that Maya's playing had reached past their defenses and touched something tender inside them. And then, just as suddenly as the intensity had built, it began to fade. The melody settled back down, becoming softer and more gentle. Maya's hands moved with increasing delicacy, each note given space to breathe and resonate. The ending approached, those final measures that always felt like watching the sun set, beautiful and sad and inevitable all at once. The last notes hung in the air, fading gradually into silence. Maya's hands remained on the keys for a moment, her head bowed slightly. She could feel her heart beating hard in her chest. Her fingers were trembling again, but this time from the intensity of what she just shared, not from nervousness. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The silence stretched out like a held breath, as if the entire audience was afraid that any sound would shatter the magic of what they'd just experienced. Maya sat at the piano, her hands still resting lightly on the keys, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She had poured everything into that performance, and now she felt both emptied out and strangely full at the same time. Then someone started clapping. It was a single person at first, somewhere near the back of the hall. But within seconds it spread like wildfire. The entire audience erupted into applause that was almost thunderous in its intensity. People weren't just clapping politely the way you do at the end of a performance because it's expected. They were on their feet, their hands coming together with real force, real enthusiasm. Some were wiping tears from their faces as they clapped. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, smiling widely. "Bravo," someone shouted from the balcony. "Beautiful," another voice called out. Maya felt the wave of sound wash over her, felt the vibrations of hundreds of people expressing their approval. Her face broke into a smile, genuine and unguarded. She had hoped her playing would speak for itself, but she hadn't expected this. The warmth of their response filled something inside her that she hadn't realized was empty. Mrs. Patterson was on her feet in the 3rd row, clapping so hard her hands hurt, tears streaming freely down her face. She had always known Maya was special, had always believed in her student's gift. But seeing that gift recognized by so many people, seeing her girl triumph over someone who had tried to diminish her, it was almost too much to bear. Vincent remained standing in the wings, but he was no longer watching Maya with skepticism. His arms had fallen to his sides. His carefully composed expression had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. He swallowed hard, feeling an uncomfortable tightness in his throat. When was the last time music had moved him like this? When was the last time he'd played with even a fraction of the honesty this teenage girl had just demonstrated? The applause continued for what felt like minutes. Maya stood up carefully, keeping one hand on the piano bench to orient herself. She gave a small bow toward where she knew the audience was, her other hand finding the piano for balance. The cheering somehow got even louder, but Maya wasn't done yet. As the applause began to fade slightly, she sat back down at the piano. The audience quieted quickly, sensing that something more was about to happen. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward in her seat, curious. This wasn't planned. They had only discussed Maya playing one piece if she chose to accept the challenge. Maya's fingers found the keys again, but this time she didn't launch into a known composition. Instead, she began to improvise, creating something entirely new in the moment. The melody started simple, just a few notes exploring a theme. It was tentative at first, like someone testing the temperature of water before diving in. Then it began to grow. The theme Maya was developing seemed to tell the story of her own life. The notes spoke of childhood confusion, of a little girl trying to understand why the world she experienced was different from the one everyone else described. The melody meandered through minor keys, uncertain and searching. There was loneliness in those notes, the isolation that comes from being different in ways that other people don't understand or don't want to understand. But then the music shifted. A new theme emerged, bright and clear, cutting through the darkness like a beam of light. This was the moment Maya had discovered piano, had found her voice in those 88 keys. The melody danced and celebrated, showing the joy of finally finding a place where she belonged, where her blindness didn't matter, or perhaps even helped her hear things more clearly. Vincent found himself walking slowly toward the piano, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. He watched Maya's hands as they moved across the keys with such confidence, creating complex harmonies and counter-melodies on the spot. This wasn't just technical skill. This was composition happening in real time. Each musical phrase leading naturally to the next as if it had always existed, and Maya was simply discovering it. The improvisation moved through different emotional landscapes. There were moments of struggle where the bass notes became heavy and insistent, like the weight of judgment and doubt pressing down. Maya's left hand created a pattern that felt like mockery, sharp staccato notes that seemed to laugh. But her right hand answered with determination, a melody that refused to be silenced or diminished. A young pianist named Kevin sat in the 10th row, completely transfixed. He had come to this masterclass hoping to learn about proper technique and hand position. He had expected lectures about posture and pedal work. Instead, he was witnessing something that would change how he thought about music forever. Maya wasn't playing with her eyes or even really with her hands. She was playing with her soul, letting every experience she'd ever had flow through her fingers and into the instrument. The music built to a powerful crescendo. Maya's body swayed with the intensity of it, her face showing the full range of emotions the melody contained. This was the climax of the story, the moment of confrontation with all the people who had ever doubted her, all the obstacles she'd had to overcome. The piano sang with defiance and strength, declaring that she had every right to be here, to take up space, to demand to be heard. And then, like a storm passing, the intensity began to ease. The melody shifted into major keys, becoming gentler but no less powerful. This was acceptance, Maya seemed to be saying through the music. Not acceptance of limitations, but acceptance of herself exactly as she was. The notes spoke of peace found not through changing herself, but through refusing to let others define her worth. Vincent reached the edge of the stage now, standing just a few feet from the piano. Up close, he could see the concentration on Maya's face, the way her fingers seemed to know exactly where to go without any visual guidance. He could see the subtle movements of her body as she leaned into certain phrases, pulled back on others. She was completely present in the music, living inside each moment rather than planning ahead to the next. The improvisation wound toward its conclusion. Maya brought back the original theme from the beginning, but transformed now. What had been uncertain and searching was now confident and clear. The same melody that had represented confusion earlier now spoke of wisdom gained through experience. Her left hand provided a rich, full foundation while her right hand sang the theme one last time, each note given the space and respect it deserved. The final chord was neither triumphant nor sad. It simply was, hanging in the air like a question that didn't need answering. Maya held it, letting it ring out until it faded naturally into silence. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. This time the silence lasted only one heartbeat before the audience exploded into even more enthusiastic applause than before. The standing ovation was universal now. Every single person in that concert hall was on their feet, and the sound of their appreciation filled every corner of the space. Maya sat quietly, overwhelmed by the response. Tears had formed in her eyes, and she didn't try to hide them. These were good tears, the kind that come when you've been seen and understood in a way that feels almost sacred. Vincent stood on the stage, the applause washing over both of them. And then he did something that no one expected. Vincent walked across the stage toward the piano, his footsteps quiet but purposeful. The audience's applause began to fade as people noticed his movement, curious about what the famous pianist would do next. Maya heard his approach, the sound of his shoes against the wooden stage floor, and she tensed slightly, unsure of what was coming. He stopped beside the piano bench, and the hall fell completely silent once again. Every eye was on him, waiting. Vincent reached for the microphone that was clipped to the piano, his hand shaking slightly as he brought it closer to speak. "I have played on every major stage in the world," he began, his voice different now, stripped of the smooth confidence it had carried earlier. "I have performed at Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, the Sydney Opera House. I've won competitions and awards that line the walls of my home. Critics have called me a master, a virtuoso, one of the finest pianists of my generation." He paused, looking down at Maya, who sat quietly listening to his words. Her face turned slightly toward his voice. "But tonight," Vincent continued, And now there was a crack in his voice, a rawness that made several people in the audience lean forward. Tonight I learned something that I should have known all along. Something I had forgotten in my pursuit of perfection and recognition. He took a breath, steadying himself. Music isn't about what we can see. It's not about perfect technique or flawless performances. It's not even really about the notes on the page, though those matter. Music is about what we feel, what we give of ourselves, what we're brave enough to share with others. Maya felt tears sliding down her cheeks now, but she didn't move to wipe them away. She sat very still, listening to every word. "I apologized before," Vincent said, addressing Maya directly now. "But I don't think you understood how deeply I meant it. I was cruel. I was dismissive. I judged you based on what I assumed were limitations, when in reality, you possess a gift that I have been chasing my entire career and may never fully grasp." He looked out at the audience, and several people could see that his eyes were wet with tears. Vincent Ashford, who had maintained perfect composure through thousands of performances, was crying in front of hundreds of strangers. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now. But the microphone carried it to every corner of the hall. "When I was a boy, I didn't play piano to impress anyone or win anything. I played because it made me feel connected to something larger than myself. I played because it was the only way I knew how to express what was in my heart. Somewhere along the way, I lost that. I let success and ego and the pressure to maintain a reputation replace the simple joy of making music." He turned back to Maya. "You just gave us all a gift. You showed us what courage looks like. You showed us what honesty sounds like. And you did it with more grace than I have shown in years." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Some people were crying openly now, moved not just by Maya's performance but by Vincent's unexpected vulnerability. Vincent extended his hand toward Maya, then caught himself, realizing she couldn't see the gesture. Instead, he spoke gently. "May I shake your hand?" Maya nodded and held out her hand. Vincent took it in both of his, holding it carefully like something precious. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for teaching me what I had forgotten." The audience erupted once more, but this applause felt different. It wasn't just for Maya's performance anymore. It was for this moment of human connection, for Vincent's humility, for the transformation they had all witnessed. Mrs. Patterson was sobbing in her seat, her hands pressed against her mouth. She had spent 10 years nurturing Maya's talent, defending her against people who doubted, encouraging her through moments of frustration. To see her student not only triumph but also touch the heart of someone who had tried to diminish her, it was more than she had dared to hope for. As the applause finally began to fade, Vincent spoke into the microphone one more time. "I had planned to teach a masterclass tonight about technique and interpretation, but I think we've all learned something far more valuable. With your permission," he said, looking at Maya, "I would be honored if you would stay and share more of your insights with us. I suspect I have more to learn from you than you have to learn from me." Maya smiled, wiping the tears from her face. "I'd like that," she said softly. What happened next was something no one in that concert hall would ever forget. Instead of the formal masterclass that had been planned, the evening became a conversation between two musicians. Vincent asked Maya about her approach to music, about how she learned pieces without being able to read standard notation, about how she decided on interpretation and emotional direction. Maya explained how she used recordings and her teacher's guidance to learn the notes, but how she always tried to find her own truth in the music. She talked about how not being able to see the piano forced her to rely on touch and hearing in ways that had shaped her entire musical understanding. She described music in terms of texture and color and feeling, painting pictures with her words that made even experienced musicians think about their art in new ways. Vincent listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. He asked questions not to challenge but to understand. And when Maya asked him to play something, he sat at the piano and chose a simple Beethoven piece, but he played it differently than he had played anything in recent memory. He tried to play with the honesty that Maya had shown, stripping away the layers of performance and technique to find the emotional core of the music. It wasn't his best technical performance, and he fumbled a few notes in a way that his usual perfectionism would never have allowed. But it was real, and the audience felt it. The evening stretched on far longer than the scheduled time. People who had been planning to leave early stayed until the very end, not wanting to miss a moment. Musicians pulled out their phones to take notes, to record bits of the conversation, to capture something of the magic that was happening. When the event finally concluded, well past midnight, people filed out of the concert hall in a kind of daze. They hugged strangers. They called loved ones to tell them what they'd witnessed. They went home and looked at their own instruments with fresh eyes, wondering if they had the courage to be as honest as that blind girl had been. In the weeks and months that followed, word of that evening spread throughout the music world. Videos taken on phones found their way to social media, watched by millions of people who wished they had been there. Vincent reached out to Maya and Mrs. Patterson with an invitation. He wanted Maya to be a featured guest at his upcoming concert tour, not as an opening act but as a co-headliner, someone who could share the stage as an equal. Maya accepted, though she insisted on finishing her senior year of high school first. Her mother worried about her missing too much school, but eventually they found a compromise. Maya would do a limited number of performances, fitting them around her education. The first concert they did together was in Boston, and it sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. People didn't come just to hear Vincent Ashford anymore. They came to hear the blind girl who had reminded a master what music was really about. They came hoping to feel what the people in that concert hall had felt, hoping to witness that same raw honesty and courage. Maya was nervous before that first big concert, her hands trembling as she waited backstage. Vincent found her in the green room and sat down beside her. "Still scared?" he asked gently. "Terrified," Maya admitted with a small laugh. "Good," Vincent said. "That means you still care. That means you're still connected to what matters. The day you stop being nervous is the day you should worry." He paused, then added, "Just play the way you did that night. Just be honest. That's all anyone really wants, even if they don't know it yet." Maya nodded, taking a deep breath, and when she walked out onto that stage, her cane tapping against the floor, the audience rose to their feet before she had played a single note. They stood not out of pity but out of respect, out of anticipation for the gift they knew she was about to give them. She sat at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and once again shared her heart with a room full of strangers. And once again, she reminded everyone listening what it meant to be truly, courageously alive. 2 years had passed since that unforgettable night at the concert hall. Maya was 19 now, having graduated from high school with honors while somehow balancing her growing music career. The journey hadn't been easy, but then again, nothing worthwhile ever was. She sat in a small cafe near her college campus, stirring her coffee absently while her roommate Rachel described the autumn leaves outside. Rachel had become more than just someone she shared an apartment with. She had become Maya's eyes when Maya needed them, but more importantly, she had become a true friend who understood when to help and when to step back and let Maya figure things out herself. "There's someone at the door looking at you," Rachel said quietly. "Older guy, maybe 50s, wearing an expensive-looking coat. He seems nervous." Maya tilted her head slightly, listening to the approaching footsteps. They were hesitant, almost shuffling. Then a voice spoke, uncertain and soft. "Excuse me, are you Maya Chen? The pianist?" Maya smiled and gestured to the empty chair at their table. "I am. Please sit down." The man introduced himself as Richard Webb, and as he talked, his story spilled out in a rush as if he'd been holding it inside for too long.